Members of the House, please join me in welcoming Archbishops Eamon Martin and John McDowell to the Literary and Scientific Society.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael McClenaghan. I'm the principal of Union College, and it is a great privilege and joy to welcome all of you here this evening. I know for some of you, your day occupation has you here, so it's lovely to have you back this evening. And I know for many of you, this is your first time in the building, and so on behalf of the faculty of the college and the community here, a very, very warm welcome to Union College, a particular warm welcome to Archbishop John and Archbishop Eamon, and we trust that this evening will be an encouragement to them as to all of us. The room that you're sitting in this evening was built in 1881 as the chapel for Union Theological College that was built in 1853. And this building, this college, has a great history, and there's a new history of the college which is available to you to take on the way out this evening in the porch on the right-hand side. This building served as the Parliament, the first Parliament of Northern Ireland from 1922 for just over 11 years. And this room itself was the Senate of the first government of Northern Ireland, and the library was the Congress, and the office where the faculty now have their offices were the government offices for the Government of Northern Ireland. And the history of the college is rich, and we're delighted to welcome you here this evening. The college has a rich ecumenical history. Our undergraduate programme in theology, which is open to people of all faith and no faith, is accredited by St Mary's University in London, and we have a really positive and ongoing working relationship with St Mary's, which is a college in the Roman Catholic tradition. The cross that you can see this evening above you on the wall is a gift to the college in memory of Principal Barclay, and I'm told reliably by a Benedictine friend that it was made for Principal Barclay by the Benedictine artist, Brother Benedict Totti from Glenstill Abbey. And so even this evening above the Archbishops as they speak is a small token of the history of Union College and its ecumenical commitments. Our great longing as a college is that we would be a community that studies Christian theology seriously and humbly and reverently in the service of the global Christian church. And so it's a great privilege this evening to welcome you all here, to welcome society, and we look forward very much to this conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. It really is delightful to see so many people and from so many different backgrounds, and we're really, really appreciative of the various chaplaincies here today from different backgrounds, and those of none, of course. It's important that we're all here together. The Literific has a proud history of welcoming debate, for welcoming dialogue on a number of hard issues. Of course, we shouldn't shy away from things that are tough to talk about. And tonight we have what really I think is a phenomenal event. Of course, many of you will know the history of this place. Events like these might not have been so common in the past, but we are really delightful for us, not only as students, but as those who like to see debate, who like to see genuine discussion. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce Archbishop John to address you all first, and I really hope we have a phenomenal event. Thank you.
Just to thank the officers of the Literific for their very kind invitation and for the hospitality which we've received here from both the members of the society and the principal and the faculty who are here from Union. I want to start off on a fairly light note. I'm not going to talk about ecumenical theology, at least not at the moment. That might come a bit later on. But just to say a few things about when we were talking about this, or when we were in correspondence about this earlier, it was about, I suppose, ecumenical encounter in modern Ireland. So I want to say, first of all, that probably at least as important as the theological imperatives and dialogues that we all have is our experience of one another. Our experience of people from what was then called the other community when I was growing up. So I was fortunate in that I grew up in the 50s and 60s, when in the sort of working class area where I grew up, there were mixed housing estates. It wouldn't have been 50-50, but it would have been something like 70-30, which meant that where I grew up, I had a lot of friends from every area of the community. But in those days, that did not include people of other faiths, that is, people from the Muslim faith, or so very few of those, but lots and lots of Catholic friends growing up. And that is the time when the wax of your personality is still very soft and the impressions go very deep. And those impressions stay with you. It's almost impossible to eradicate them. They certainly won't be totally expunged by any intellectual arguments, because they go so deep into the personality. So I was fortunate enough to grow up in the late 50s and early 60s. And those were the days, I am, as you will know, in that slightly pejorative phrase, I'm a boomer. So if you're a boomer, there were lots of you. There was a baby boom. So in every house in the street where I grew up, and there maybe would have been 120 houses in that street, there were at least 4 children in each house, sometimes many more than that. So when you went out into the street, it really was just a hive of humanity. And you mixed with everybody and got to know everybody. My very closest friends happened to be Catholic, so every Sunday evening I went to Mass with them in the old Holy Rosary Chapel on the Armagh Road. And I can remember it very well from I was very small, 4 or 5. And it was the Old Latin Mass. It was before the Second Council. And continued to do that over the years and keep those friendships up. And even though we didn't maybe see each other for many, many years, the fact of the childhood friendship weighed far more heavily in my affections or in my mind than almost anything else. And I think it's important to say that those human relationships are extraordinarily important, and it's why we need more opportunities, as it were, to build them. The other thing, which when I was speaking to Archbishop Eamon beforehand, I said I would talk about just at the moment, and I'm aware I haven't got all night to talk about, is just to fill you in a little bit on the ecumenical structures that exist here in Ireland. So there are, and have been for many years, formal ecumenical instruments for all of the churches to talk to one another. The oldest of those is the Irish Council of Churches, which was formed in it hadn't that name, but its first iteration was over 100 years ago. And it's not a confessional body in that you don't have to profess certain things to belong to it. You have to want to accompany other people from other traditions of the Christian faith in it. So it was, in its early days, largely for Protestant churches. Today, and Archbishop Eamon may say a little bit more about that, it also includes people from all of the Orthodox traditions that exist in Ireland. A lot of the new Pentecostal, largely black churches who have come in, Redeemed and others. It has been a remarkable forum for both theological and personal encounter over the years in the churches. The other body is called the Irish Interchurch Committee, which is how the Irish Council of Churches, Protestant, Orthodox and others interfaces with the Bishops' Conference of the Catholic Church of Ireland. And that, again, is a formal way of talking to one another and of getting to know one another. There's the Church Leaders Group, which Archbishop Eamon and I belong to, which consists of the Church of Ireland, Presbyterian, Methodist, and the President of the Irish Council of Churches, who's there to make sure that the smaller churches don't get forgotten about in the discussions and whatnot that we have. And one of the more significant things we did a number of years ago was put out a thing called the St. Patrick's Day Statement. And essentially what the St. Patrick's Day Statement did was it said that we, the churches, recognise that we have been in the past at least part of the problem. But that doesn't mean that we can't be part of the answer as we go forward. And we recognised and said for the first time, I think, that we, the churches, have very often been captive to other gods, to the gods of country or of nationalism, whatever sort of nationalism it is, and not to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. And that and very often we didn't speak sufficiently words of calm and peace into difficult situations. And that's not to say that there weren't huge numbers of things going on, particularly on the ground, where parish clergy of all traditions kept the lid on things during very difficult times. And their contribution to the stability of Northern Ireland in those difficult days can never be overestimated. It was quiet work, but it was the work that was done of making sure that the harsh word wasn't said, that the worst things that could be said weren't said, that there was a spirit of drawing back and of moderation. The Irish School of Ecumenics is a body which is funded to a large extent by all the churches where academic work is carried on, largely on subjects to do with ecumenism. And there's now a centre at DCU, and I always trip over the name of it. It's called something like the Centre for Religion, Human Values and International something or other. And the reason why I'm slightly embarrassed about it is because I opened the thing, the centre at the time, or the Taoiseach actually opened it and I responded to his speech. And it's been doing a lot of good work in trying to build up structured dialogue between both churches, other faith communities and other philosophical groups who wouldn't profess faith, but who profess a set of clear values and should be involved in those church-state dialogues. And I'll finish in what's this rather dry session in saying that between the Anglican Communion and the Roman Catholic Church, there has been since the 1970s a commission called the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission, and it has done ARCIC. And it has done immensely good theological work. So it's the theological body where the member churches of the Anglican Communion from around the world appoint people. The Roman Catholic Church appoints people, and they discuss areas of where before we would have assumed there were huge differences in what we understood certain elements of the faith, to try to find out what the common areas are. And they've done enormous work in terms of baptism, Eucharist and ministry and whatnot. For instance, some very good reports on that. But it's not an overly polite, in a sense, dialogue. It's not overly deferential. And I remember, I know Archbishop Eamon won't mind me saying, I remember that ARCIC produced a document called The Gift of Authority about 10 years ago. And I was on the Anglican group to respond to that document. And what the gift of authority was, it was an attempt to say that the Petrine office, the office of the Pope, could be a gift to the whole church, and to think of it in that way and not simply as a gift to the Western Latin tradition. And there were a group of theologians in the Church of Ireland looked at it and they would say, this is the gift of authority. And to be honest with you, we said, thanks all the same, but we'd rather not at the moment. But that dialogue has continued, and there have been other documents. So those ecumenical dialogues are very important, where the theologians engage, very deep down stuff. But the accompaniment and the friendship of Christian people who can speak into civic society, particularly together, which is always a very powerful witness, is also has its place.
Thanks very much, Archbishop John. Reverend Michael, thank you for your welcome, and President and Vice President of Literific. Thank you for inviting us here this evening. You'll notice that Archbishop John said that when he was growing up in the 50s and the 60s, well, when I was growing up in the 60s and the 70s in Derry, The word ecumenism wasn't part of my vocabulary at all. I couldn't claim that I had those kinds of friendships because most of the people that I associated with in my area were Catholic. Went to a Catholic school. It was really only when I was a teenager that I began to discover young people of different Christian traditions, and that was through music. I was a brass musician who were in big demand in the many bands and orchestras and ensembles around the Northwest. And one of the things you find as a musician is it doesn't really matter what denomination you are. So I ended up playing in marching bands who kept myself well hidden, as well as in all sorts of different shows and, opportunities, really. And it was through that I began to make some very, very close friends from different Christian traditions, Presbyterian, Church of Ireland, and one good Methodist friend. I have to say one thing about growing up was that I always had an interest because, we were right in the thick of the Troubles at that stage. So the whole question of Protestant, Catholic, loyalist, Republican, unionist, nationalist, these kind of this binary way of thinking was something that we were very conscious of. So whenever I went to study for the priesthood, I did have a big interest in finding out a little bit more about what exactly do we mean by ecumenism in terms of promoting cooperation and indeed unity amongst Christians of different denominations. I suppose in a way, in my own prayer and reflection, the desire that they may be one is something that gets us all and makes us wonder, what's the responsibility that puts on all of us, whatever tradition we belong to try to ensure that our division or disunity isn't a scandal or a source of scandal for others. And also that twin wish of the Lord that the world may believe. These were things that really used to trouble me, I have to say, in prayer and indeed in theological debate. And therefore, to understand ecumenism, I began to feel that, of course, as Archbishop John has said, the whole question of dialogue, sincere dialogue between people of different Christian traditions, I felt was really, really important, that kind of intellectual pursuit, but as well as that, opportunities for shared prayer and for shared projects, I suppose a spiritual dimension to ecumenism, and then, of course, shared Christian witness in the world. And I think this is something that has really come to the fore, particularly on this island, and indeed more widely in Europe, where Christians of different traditions begin to find themselves with a common purpose to pastorally witness, to be involved in mission, to really, I suppose, promote holiness and relationship with the Lord. And I think, therefore, that I've become much more interested then when I was ordained as a young priest. I worked in Derry, and I was working in the Catholic Cathedral, St. Eugene's in Derry. The Protestant Church of Ireland Cathedral was St. Colum's, and we had a 2 cathedrals festival and much more engagement with each other. With the Methodist Church, because again, I was working in the city, their amazing outreach at the time to the homeless, to the poor, was something that I admired very much. And then also with some of my previous friends from the Presbyterian Church began to forge those relationships. I personally also had a big interest in the charismatic movement, both as a young adult and then as an ordained priest. So in that, I began to get a sense of the whole evangelical demands on all of us to preach the gospel, to bring people to the joy of the gospel. So for me, really, the ecumenical endeavour is something that I have always been interested in, and I believe we've a lot more work to do. As John was speaking there about the different dialogues and the different structures structures in Ireland for ecumenical activity. I think it's also important for us, and I did say to John I'd like to mention this, there's a very changed ecclesial landscape on this island. And just to give you some indication of that, more recently I've become aware of the very large number of Romanian Orthodox people on the island of Ireland. Even within that, we also have other Orthodox churches of the Byzantine tradition. We have a new metropolitan, Archbishop Iakovos, who is probably the most senior Greek Orthodox cleric on this island at the moment. I mentioned the Romanian Orthodox. The Russian Orthodox are here in big numbers in Ireland. There's a Russian Orthodox bishop in Ireland. The main Russian Orthodox Church is in Dublin, but they also have communities meeting for liturgy in Athlone, in Belfast, in Drogheda, in Galway, in Limerick, in Cork, and in Waterford. So sometimes we don't realise, when we tend to think of ecumenism through the lens of the main Christian churches that we have been familiar with here, we have to realize that there are a lot of smaller churches and ecclesial communities. There's Serbian Orthodox in Ireland. The Georgian Orthodox Church in Ireland has a community and worshipping congregation in Inchicore in Dublin. You might be surprised to know then from the Oriental churches, the Coptic Orthodox Patriarchate is based in Bray. They have a bishop, Bishop Anthony, who's based in Bray, and many other Coptic Orthodox churches on this island, Tipperary, Galway. St. Thomas's Indian Malankara Orthodox Church in Dublin, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church. So I'm really trying to give the sense that we've got to think much more widely now when we're talking about ecumenism on this island, including also the Apostolic Armenian Church, and I'm sure there's others that I have forgotten about. Archbishop John was speaking about some of the dialogues, and in particular the one he's been involved in himself, in Archic, the Anglican Roman Catholic dialogue. But the Catholic Church worldwide, of course, engages in very formal dialogue and conversations with Orthodox churches of the Byzantine tradition, with the Oriental Orthodox churches, the Assyrian Church of the East, the Old Catholic Bishops' Conference Union of Utrecht. These are formal dialogues. The Anglican Communion, as we've mentioned, the Lutheran World Federation, the World Methodist Council, the World Communion of Reformed Churches, the Baptist World Alliance, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, you might be aware of, the various Pentecostal and New Charismatic churches, various evangelical churches, the Mennonite World Conference, and the Salvation Army. In fact, Bishop Brendan Leahy, who's the Bishop of Limerick, he's a member of that particular dialogue. So I think it's very important to realise that the dialogue part of ecumenism is something that we need to keep alive, because there are a lot of critics out there who say that ecumenism has been diluted down now to just kind of friendship. Be nice to each other. And therefore, in some ways, you could argue it's not really doing a lot. And some people would actually argue that it's doing harm, because in many ways it makes you very careful not to offend, not to really explore key issues, theological issues, tradition issues. And I think that this is something important for us to realize, particularly in this 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. So as you know, in the early church, that question, who do you say I am, became extremely important, because different people gave different answers. And therefore, the early church really struggling with differences, divisions, heresies, and all that meant. And the journey through Nicaea, Constantinople, Chalcedon, Ephesus, these were ways of the church really answering that question, what do we believe in? And I suppose if you think of Nicaea, that I believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God. To get to the creed that we have, the various creeds, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Nicene Constantinople Creed that most people would be most familiar with, to get there meant that you had tough dialogue. So what I'm really arguing here tonight is that the importance of friendship, building community, building understanding, but also not being afraid to open up the conversations. At the moment, there's a very interesting conversation going on between the Roman Catholic and the Presbyterian Church in Ireland on the whole question of justification, to really see, what do we think about that? Why do we argue this way? Why do we argue the other way? Archbishop John mentioned the whole question of the primacy of Peter, and the whole question about do we really believe the role of the Bishop of Rome is significant, and why is it significant? Very interesting. Pope Paul VI and Pope St. John Paul II have both publicly expressed regret and apology for the harm that the question of Petrine authority has caused to the Christian churches down through the centuries, and therefore that it should never become an obstacle to greater understanding and cooperation. So I think that in opening up this conversation tonight, Archbishop John and I have tried to show both the Irish and on the island of Ireland, Irish and the British conversations that are going on between the various churches, but also to be conscious this is something much, much bigger that is really for the universal church or for the Christian family. And of course, that they may be one is the dynamic and the force behind all ecumenism. So thanks for listening to our introductions. Thanks, James.
Thank you both for the addresses and your wonderful words. I'd like to begin by touching upon the central theme of this evening's LitTalk, which is, as was mentioned, ecumenicism. Now, Archbishop McDowell, in 2020, in an interview with the Belfast Telegraph, when you were the Bishop of Cahir, you said that relationships between churches, certainly at leadership level, but also very often at the grassroots, have never been better. Of course, it was only last month that we saw Pope Leo and King Charles pray together in the Sistine Chapel. Indeed, the first time both figures have done so in over 500 years, or about 500 years. Is greater cooperation between the Anglican Communion and the Catholic Church desirable? And how do you both foresee how this relationship will develop in the near future?
It is, I think, desirable here in Ireland because the Anglican Church in Ireland, that is the Church of Ireland, in some sense has a lot of ground to make up. And relationships are very good, the dialogues are very good, but we need to remember, very often you speak to modern Anglicans, they talk about the Anglican Communion or whatever the particular expression of it is in the country as being the bridge church, as being, looked upon as being a bridge between Catholic and Reformed. But in Ireland, we need to remember that it was the Church of Ireland who persecuted everybody, the Catholics and the Presbyterians, for many, many years. And we sort of forget about that. But it's still a live issue in many places, believe it or not. And the other side of that, and this is probably slightly provocative, but I'll say it anyway. I mean, this must be the only country in the world where two Latin words can start a row, ne temere. And you'll go out into country parishes, particularly in the Republic of Ireland, where little schools closed down because there wasn't a community to feed them anymore. So it's important that we talk through those things and then that we understand our history, and we understand that it has in part made us what we are, but we're not prisoners of it, and we're not going to let it determine our future. And the wider Anglican Communion side of Catholic, if you go to Africa, Anglicans and Roman Catholics just work together because they don't have, certainly the Anglicans don't have the Reformation baggage that comes with Britain. They just don't have that. They're generally people who are in very difficult, hostile environments, and they're very, very content to work with people who acknowledge, and we're just past last Sunday, the Feast of Christ the King, the kingship of our Lord.
Archbishop Martin.
Yeah, I actually was in London last week and I was speaking with Cardinal Vincent Nichols, who was present in Rome at the meetings between Pope Leo and King Charles. And he said to me that for him, it was hugely significant. Now, this is a Catholic church leader in England and in Wales. And he said that for him it represented the healing of a deep historical wound. Those are the words, which tallies very much, John, with what you're saying there. He said, well, I probably wouldn't use this language, but he said, to see my king and my pope praying together meant so much to him. And I do think it was a very significant symbolic moment. Also the return, which maybe a lot of people missed, when Pope Leo and King Charles were in St. Paul outside the walls, one of the big basilicas, and King Charles was named as I think it is an honorary co-frater, or like a brother of the church. Now, in years gone by, pre-Reformation, the King of England would have been an honorary canon of St. Paul outside the walls. But there was something very significant, and it's interesting that the chair which they had created for King Charles in St. Paul outside the walls, which is permanent there, is inscribed with the words "Ut unum sint," that they may be one. So I think there is no doubt that it sent a message to all of us, particularly in the Anglican and Roman Catholic tradition, about the importance of friendship. It's very interesting too, your comments, John, about Africa there. I do think that we're becoming very conscious, all of us in the various Christian denominations, that the need to witness is not easy in the world at the moment, and is leading actually to people being persecuted. Just last week, we had the concentration on persecuted brothers and sisters, Christians of various denominations around the world. And this ecumenism of blood, as it's called, which is the recognition that Christians of all traditions and denominations are actually being put to death today for their faith. And that recognition is something that makes us much more aware that our squabbles and neighbourly disputes have to be seen in the perspective of the fact that Christian brothers and sisters are dying for the faith today in many countries around the world. In Rome, there is the community of Sant'Egidio. I don't know if you've come across them. They've been doing a lot of work in healing and reconciliation across Christian denominations and other divisions around the world. And there's actually a church, a basilica in Rome, a church in Rome, San Bartolomeo, which is dedicated to Christian martyrs of all traditions. And I think sometimes we think about our own tradition and how they have suffered, but actually we have a common ecumenism of blood, of witness to the faith. And we know, of course, that witness to the faith is something that we're all called upon to do now, particularly when you look at what's going on around us in the world.
Indeed, and I'd like to comment. Last week, of course, was Red Wednesday, when persecuted Christians all around the world are remembered. An interesting statistic on that, and I don't have exactly here in front of me, but it's something like 430 million Christians across the world live in countries where they are actively persecuted, where Christians are killed for their faith. And that's a very important fact that we should remember. In regard to unity, of course, Pope Francis added 21 Coptic Christian martyrs to the Roman martyrology, and indeed Pope Francis had warm relations with Justin Welby. What are the concrete steps both of you might envision Pope Leo and now Sarah Mullally to take in regard to strengthening those links between your two churches?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it'll be very interesting to see Archbishop Sarah Mullally and Pope Leo together. That in itself will be a very interesting and symbolic moment. I think that it's difficult, and you probably could detect that in what I was saying, to do a lot more at the moment than witness to friendship. and cooperation and collaboration in terms of joint witness to the Christian message. Let's not forget there are difficulties. The ordination of women presents a difficulty to ecumenism. The ordination of a woman bishop presents an even greater barrier to any real lasting unity, I would imagine. At the same time, I suppose the recognition of Anglican orders is something that is not clear within the Roman Catholic tradition. If you look at issues like shared Eucharist, shared communion, these are tricky problems. And therefore, I don't want to overly exaggerate the issues that, we're going to be all happy family. But the idea of diversity within Christianity is something that we can not only live with, but indeed, be content to accept that we're on this journey, and it's really up to the Holy Spirit to lead us forward, and to accept these moments and these opportunities for friendship. Because if people in Ireland in particular, and in these islands, we do need to model friendship. So John and I doing things together, doing what we can together rather than separately, is extremely important here on this island, where communities are segregated or divided, and where on the ground it is difficult for local parishes to meet and to have conversations. Look at the issues we have over legacy issues here, where we don't really even understand the pain and the hurt that our communities have gone through. We, as I've said before, we actually even have a segregation of grief. And that is something that is really difficult. So for me to see Pope Leo and Archbishop Sarah meeting together, praying together, witnessing together, will have a very dramatic effect, I think, in the whole question of Christian unity, and perhaps even more so than Pope Francis and Archbishop Justin. I think it'll be a deeper symbol, yeah?
Yeah. Sarah Mullally, it was in many ways a remarkable moment, and of course it has caused now a huge division within the Anglican Communion. But that's another thing. I mean, the Anglican Communion we have to live with the fact that we are a permanently divided house, and that's simply to do with the nature of authority within Anglicanism, which is very dispersed. There is no magisterium. There's no what Newman called an antecedent probability, is how he argued for the office of the papacy. That there was an antecedent probability that where there was going to be great diversity of opinion, there had to be an arbiter in place. That will never happen within Anglicanism. We're always going to have to live with a great deal of messiness within the Anglican Communion. But the Church of England is the most bureaucratic church in Christendom. It is quite unbelievably bureaucratic at all its levels and all its doings, which is why it took so long to have an appointment of an Archbishop of Canterbury. The Pope was within a few weeks, and it took over a year to have someone appointed. And I say this because they consult with everybody. I don't know how many people were spoken to about the next Archbishop of Canterbury, and I was one of them, one of the hundreds of people that was spoken to. You have an interview with someone from Lambeth Palace, who actually comes from Bangor, the guy that's looking after that end of things in County Down. And you have an interview with someone from Buckingham Palace, because it's a Crown appointment. And I remember saying, and they were agonising about the woman thing, because if a woman was appointed, it would cause great difficulty within the Anglican Communion. And the only positive contribution I think I made to the conversation was, if you think that a woman is the right person, appoint her, and don't worry about what might appear to be the repercussions, because that will work itself out at its end. And we had a group of 40 Church of England clergy in Armagh last week, and as well as being bureaucratic, they're quite good at bringing people on the church. So they identify clergy who they think might make future deans and bishops and things. They came just to get experience of a place which had begun to overcome its divisions. They came to Northern Ireland, and I had a very brief, I think I only had 5 minutes with them because I was going off to somewhere else. And they said, if there was one thing you were going to tell us, what would it be? And I said, get behind Sarah Mullally and stop the ridiculous degree of infighting that goes on, because she's there to try, I think, to make a difference within the Church of England, not necessarily the Communion, but within the Church of England, and to try to straighten that out. So, and I think she will. I think the symbolism will be very significant of a woman Archbishop of a world who's recognised as the primus inter pares, the first among equals of the primates of the Anglican Communion. And one very final thing about St Paul's without the walls. 2 years ago, the Anglican primates had their primates meeting in Rome, and we had a service of Vespers in St Paul's without the walls. And two things happened at that service. Well, actually, three things happened at that service. One was that the Cardinal Protector of it, who's a retired American, presented us all with a pectoral crucifix. He also spoke to us. He said, and he was very hesitant about this, but it was a lovely thing he said. In the end, he said, I hope you can see this as a visit ad limina apostolorum. Catholic bishops make an ad limina visit to Rome, preferably once every 5 years, but it's apostolorum. It's of the apostles of Peter and Paul. Mm-hmm. And because of the Pauline emphasis in Protestant theology, he made that point, and he was quite sheepish about making it. And the third thing that happened at that service, which was that the superior of the order who was conducting the service keeled over in the middle of it. It was quite an interesting. I thought he didn't look very well, and then all of a sudden he just went. And it was a tremendous tribute to Roman Stoicism that he managed to stay upright for quite as long as he did.
Very good. Now, many here today are university students. The Literific itself, of course, is a student society at Queen's. And it is truly wonderful to see the various other chaplaincies and Christian societies in attendance here this evening. And it is on that note that I felt that it would be appropriate to touch upon attitudes towards religion and the faith amongst young people. The Christian churches in Ireland and the UK, as well as across the world, do not have the prominence and influence that they once enjoyed. The world is more secular. Participation in religious practice is seen by many as old-fashioned or even outdated. And indeed, the abuse scandals have certainly damaged the image of churches for many. Yet I wanted to ask you both about recent surveys and polling that indicate that Gen Z, people born between 1997 and 2012, many of those in that demographic will be in this room, are less likely to identify as atheists than their parents' generation, and are much more likely to identify as spiritual. That's a survey coming from The Times. Indeed, in YouGov polling, and I clarified this is UK-based, in August 2020, only 18% of 18 to 24-year-olds stated that they believed there was a God. However, in August of this year, that number stands at 37%. So just how significant are these figures? Have either of you witnessed a change in recent times? And why should young people, and especially those at university, care about religion or God or what the churches really have to offer?
Do you understand?
The word spirituality was probably unknown in Ireland before the 1960s. You didn't talk about spirituality, you talked about religious devotion or religious obligation or duty or whatever it was. And spirituality is essentially an individual's relationship to God. But nearly anybody who takes that sort of seriously or tries to practice it in a way seriously, whatever that God may be, finds that it's impossible to do it on one's own, that you need to be part of a community. And I think what's happening with Gen Z and with others is that they have a slight suspicion of institutions. Therefore, it takes perhaps a little longer for them to identify with those institutions, because when you say the word institution, people think bad. That's a bad thing, an institution. But an institution, and when people want to abuse or be pejorative about the church, they talk about the institutional church. But an institution is a phenomenon that carries wisdom across generations. Unless you have institutions that carry that wisdom. Now, institutions also carry mistakes across generations, and a good institution is one that's reforming itself all the time. That's looking, and I think that young people now post, and I mean, I know we blame everything on COVID, but when people could not go out and join with other people, they felt that very, very keenly. And so I think now those people who were 14, 15, 16, 17 going through those COVID years are very keen to engage with collective spirituality and with whatever form it might be. And in a sense, the last thing that we need to do is get in the way, is sort of get in the light and allow that to evolve with the people who are able to make it evolve in a kind of positive way, but always there in the sense of encouraging it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I do think it's real. It's small, and it's the quiet revival as it's being characterized in many places, but it is real, and we see it on the ground. People like yourselves who want to know more about faith, who want to learn, and who want to live a life close to the Lord Jesus. The bottom line is that a lot of young adults today are struggling to find any meaning in what's been offered to them and indeed to their parents. They see a world that's empty, and it's the emperor's new clothes. There's nothing there. And therefore they seek something of the transcendent. They seek something of beauty, of truth. They're drawn to God. I also believe the Holy Spirit is at work. I mean, it is the Holy Spirit who rejuvenates the church. And by rejuvenation, we're really talking about bringing youth and life and growth back into the church. So therefore, I think we need to respect the work of the Holy Spirit, to nurture it. I think it's small, and like any green shoots, you don't trample them out. You don't, as John says, you need to water it. You need to ensure that there's an opportunity for growth. One thing that's interesting, though, is that the churches are probably struggling a little bit with this phenomenon. I was at a lecture given by Cardinal Aveline, who is the Cardinal Archbishop of Marseille. He was speaking in Trinity College during the summer, and he described this very phenomenon, particularly in France, where a lot of young people who were never baptized are coming. Their parents might have been Catholic or grandparents, and they're coming to the Catholic Church now to go through the catechumenate to be accepted into the church. And the same phenomenon is happening in the other Christian traditions. Why? He's not sure. It's a strange phenomenon that people were not expecting. But he did say to me, it's presenting a challenge to the French Catholic Bishops' Conference. And it was quite interesting what he said. He said, a lot of these young people are coming with the fervor of a personal encounter with the Lord Jesus. And they want to be baptized. They want to be part of the church. However, they're then finding it difficult to find a home in the ecclesia, the gathering of the church, precisely the point that you're saying, John. They're finding it difficult to go to the normal Sunday service and to be part of a parish community or a congregation. So he says this is presenting an issue for the Catholic bishops in France, and I'm sure for the other traditions as well. I think there's something very special happening here. We need to pray. We need to welcome these kinds of conversations, the need for catechesis, understanding of the faith, and even the understanding that you are part of a gathering in the church. It's not just I'm a lone ranger. You know, Jesus needs me. He doesn't really need anybody. He just needs me. You know, this sense of a Messiah complex almost. But a funny story just to finish in this one. A priest friend of mine in Derry told me that one Saturday evening he was holding the vigil mass for the weekend, and he was walking down through the congregation as he does every week, and there was a young man sitting at the end of the row with his parents, you know, and he was saying good evening, and probably looking for somebody to read the lesson or something like that. So he's saying good evening, and the young man said, "Well, Father, are you pleased with me tonight?" And he said, "Yeah, really good to see you. Thank you so much for coming along. Thank you very, very much. It's good to have you." "What do you mean?" he said. "I'm always here. I brought these two." So it was a great example of the role reversal, where young adults are actually bringing their parents to faith. I mean, some of you may be in that situation. And if you are, then just trust in the Holy Spirit, because your parents will want to find the faith. They may not say it outright, but they'll be searching, and you know, they're seekers like the rest of us.
Of course. Just touching upon France, and there are, it seems, thousands and thousands of adults being baptized into the church, and certainly their young people are in many ways looking to the church, and you spoke about fitting into the ecclesia, the church. Do you think there's a leaning of young Catholics towards tradition of the church? You commented once on a podcast that you find that many young Catholics are fascinated with the use of Latin, the use of the old liturgy as it is. Is that something that you've witnessed?
Oh yeah, I think that is happening. There's no doubt. It may be part of that, what I was saying about the search for this transcendent, for beauty, and they're finding that beauty in traditional Latin Mass or whatever it might be, or the beautiful music of the Gregorian chant, or just the sheer mystique and the silence. I mean, because, you're young people yourselves. It's very difficult to find space in this crazy world. You have to make the effort to find space for silence, and of course God is in the silences, and God is there. So I'm not sure, there is something about that. I don't know if we fully understand what's going on there, but I do feel that they're looking for something, as we all are, and they're finding it in some perhaps strange places.
Mm-hmm. The strange Tom Holland, who does that history, or I don't know, but he's a friend of a friend, and I happened to, as I had a dinner one night, and he was there, and he's one of these people who came back to faith very late, in his 40s and whatnot, and I was saying, what is it? What should we be emphasising? And he said, the weird bits, the real presence, the whole idea of transcendence, the things that people would have poo-pooed before. So they're the things, it's the mystery of it all that has drawn us back in again, because we have begun to realise that the world is an inexplicable place to us without some big story like that to do.
Archbishop McDowell, I wanted to pose a question to you, and then I'll pose one to you after, Archbishop Martin. Dame Sarah Mullally was appointed the Archbishop of Canterbury, of course, after almost a year of the position being vacant following Justin Welby's resignation. Though the process was perhaps less exhilarating than that of the papal conclave, it was nonetheless historic, with Archbishop Mullally being the first woman to hold the position, which is of course seen as the spiritual leader of the Anglican Communion. How do you receive her appointment? And I know you've already touched upon it, but what specifically do you think she will bring to the church? And how might the Anglican Communion ensure unity in the face of displeasure from factions like the conservative groupings like GAFCON? And I know you've talked about the unity and it being a broad church and such. So just what are your opinions on that?
As I said, you're not going to get the sort of unity that you'll have within the magisterium of the Roman Church. Just not going to happen because of the structures of Anglicanism. It'll be held together in other ways. I would, and I don't want to sort of appear to be pedantic, but whatever the Archbishop of Canterbury is, he or she is not the spiritual leader of Anglicanism. They are a primus inter pares, first among equals. Although I have, within that primus group, argued for the phrase to be changed to par inter pares, and equal among equals. because that tends to be how it works. What I think she will do, and I mean this is the sort of criminology of Anglicanism. She came in as the Bishop of London first, and London is the most difficult diocese in the Church of England. It is just full of widely opinionated clergy people, who many of whom are very gifted, and from the extremes within the Church of England. And she came in after she succeeded a man called Richard Charters, who was the Bishop of London for many years, and he was the most lordly character you have ever met. And he made the Queen's accent sound like a Cockney. He had the most cut glass. He was unbelievably, an unbelievably great Bishop of London. And she came in after him, which was an extraordinarily difficult role to take on. And she was kind of denigrated. And you would hear, you go to clergy gatherings in London, you'd hear this, because she'd been a chief nurse in the UK, so she held that and they used to call her Nurse Mullally. And it was a mixture of misogyny and just this sort of intellectual superiority. But she was able to relate to all of those traditions of churchmanship in London. So she had a very difficult few years there, and she's coming in. So what I think she will do is she will concentrate much more in the Church of England than she will on the communion. It was the communion and the rows within the communion that really crucified Justin. And I think she will take the much more specific task of trying to sort out the difficulties that the Church of England has within its its own body. So I don't know her particularly, but her husband's from Limerick. I'd met her.
Is it a good sign or a bad sign?
Well, it's a good sign now, but he was something big in the city, kind of when he's involved with the Honourable Irish Society and whatnot. I think she will be a tonic for the church. She's also, and this is an interesting, she's the first Archbishop of Canterbury, not only as a woman, but who has never been to a theological college. Oh. So there are lots of area theological learning communities in the Church of England, and she would have come up through one of those. So it would have been distance learning, a lot of it. But it also shows a tremendous commitment for people when they progress towards ordination through that route. So she's a first in very many ways.
Mm-hmm. Archbishop Martin.
Go easy now, James.
Speaking in October 2024 to the newspaper The Irish Catholic, you spoke of the Irish Church going through a time of renewal and change. The article titled, "Be Prepared for a Church That is Small, Poor and Strong." We know that discussions have been ongoing at the Vatican about the possible amalgamations of Irish dioceses. And at the domestic level, the Church will have to find a way with dealing with compensation payments to abuse victims that the Government of Ireland is saying has to happen. Are you optimistic about the future of the Church in Ireland? And how do you think it will move forward in this century? And how might the relatively new Pontiff, Pope Leo, play into all of this?
Good question there, James. That's about 10 questions in one
true.
there, but you got your money's worth. No, actually, yeah, I do feel this is a really significant time, not just for the Catholic Church, but for all of us. I mean, I think that the idea of the Church being excluded from the public square is something that we are used to. I think that momentum is still there, but I think that it is slowing up, although you've seen the recent Supreme Court judgment about our religious education and collective worship in schools. I think that for us, we're trying to nurture something strong and deep within individual Catholics and for all of our traditions in our own faith tradition. And I think that it's what we were speaking about just now about young people. I think a lot of it is going to depend on you. And I have noticed this, young Christians who are evangelical in a sense. You saw the interesting survey, of course, about evangelicals in this part of the world, suggesting that a lot of Catholics consider themselves as evangelical, which is, let's imagine that their grandparents would probably be turning in their grave with even the suggestion of that, not to mention the evangelicals turning in their graves. But I do feel that, look, it's the joy of the gospel. Pope Francis, that was his very first encyclical, Evangelii Gaudium. And I think that what we are challenged to do is to bring the joy of believing, the truth of salvation into a world that is in huge need of redemption, and individuals who need to find a reason for living, a reason for hoping, all of those things that we read in the scriptures. There is no doubt that there's a huge credibility issue for all of the traditions, all of the churches. The Catholic Church has literally been floored by the reality of abuse. And it's something you mentioned about compensation payments. It is bringing us to our knees in more ways than one. The recognition that awful sins and crimes were committed by members of our church who were held in great esteem and in great trust. And that credibility issue is something that we in the Catholic Church, and I think in all traditions, in fact in all aspects of society and life, is something that we have to cope with. I am confident that what we have to offer, the Christian message, it is the pearl of great price. I think there are people searching who don't even know that they are searching for that pearl of great price. They need us to present the Word of God, to do so in a way which invites them, accompanies them, and brings them to the Lord. I think that evangelical spirit is needed in all of our traditions. But more than just personal salvation, I think we also need to gather people, as Archbishop John said earlier, to be part of faith communities. Because it's in faith communities that people find solidarity, they find encouragement, support, and the number of young families now who are meeting together for weekends where they can share the scriptures, where they can learn more about their faith. These are the ways in which we will slowly build something new. What happens after that, we do not know. It may mean letting go of a whole lot of the stuff that has been with us for a long time. At the moment in the Catholic Church, we've got buildings, we've got responsibility for stuff that really we have to let go of. We may become a poorer church because the sheer responsibility of compensating victims of abuse is already bringing some of the dioceses to the point of insolvency. So I think that that's going to be a reality, but in some ways maybe it will free us to concentrate on what our faith is all about.
Mm-hmm. I just have one more question before I open up to the audience. And I wouldn't be doing my job this evening if I didn't bring up last week's Supreme Court ruling that of course you've mentioned on religious education in Northern Ireland. For context, for those in the audience who may not have heard about this, although I'm sure most of you have, this followed a case that was brought to the UK Supreme Court on appeal, and it began when a girl came home from school and said prayers before her meals, telling her parents that this is what she had learned to do in school, according to the BBC. When the parents queried the child's RE provision with the school, staff told them that they were simply following Northern Ireland's Bible-based RE curriculum. The case was settled at the Supreme Court, with the highest court in the country ruling that Christian-focused religious education in Northern Ireland is unlawful because it is not objective, critical, or pluralist. So my simple question really is this, and I'm also conscious of your background in education, Archbishop Martin. Do you both accept the court's ruling, and what do you think the impact this might have on RE in schools across Northern Ireland?
Yeah, absolutely accept the court's ruling. I only managed to read the whole judgment last night, and it's a very complicated judgment. But what it certainly does not do is prevent the churches from continuing to teach religious education in schools, or to have a religious element to assemblies and to collective worship. For years, the churches have been saying that the curriculum needs to be revised. It's not adequate for today's society. Now, had it been revised 20 years ago, it probably would have been because the tendency is to revise it along the lines of the English curriculum, the English model, which has been a multicultural society for a lot longer than we have. But we now are. So if you get a little 4 or 5 year old, say 20 years ago, who was hearing about Muslims, they wouldn't have known what you were talking about. Now they're sitting beside someone who comes from a different culture, and it means something. It's an important element in the cultural makeup and in the religious makeup. So I think what's going to happen is the Department of Education will issue fresh advice on how that religious worship and religious ethos can continue within the meaning of the judgment of the Supreme Court. And I really don't think it's a disaster at all. I think it's something that we can certainly work with.
Archbishop Martin?
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting, actually, that one of the key elements of the judgment focused on the word indoctrination. That the Supreme Court felt that what it amounted to was indoctrination. And because indoctrination is a heavily loaded term with negative nuances, I actually was speaking about this to some people, and one priest said to me, he says, well, if it's indoctrination, we haven't done a very good job, he said, because we have all of these people who've been to Catholic schools for 14 years and they're not exactly filling up the pews every Sunday morning. I think that it's a challenge to us, and it's also important, and we see this in the South as well. There's currently a survey going on in the South, the 4th time actually, that the government is asking parents again and again and again and again, do you want to change the particular ethos of your schools or have a choice? And the difficulty is that parents are coming back and saying no. Because this is despite the fact I've as Archbishop of Armagh, I have schools in Dundalk, as John would have as well. And in Dundalk, the practice rate of Catholicism would be 10 to 15%, I would imagine. And almost all of the schools are Catholic schools, if not all of them. So it would be an obvious place where a diversity and plurality of education offer should be there. So a couple of years ago, on behalf of the department, I met with all of the schools, the boards of management, and I said, look, I want you to realize that, if you wish, to divest and have this school offered by a different patronage, then please do so, and they nearly threw me out of the room, and all of the schools voted to remain under Catholic patronage, which was bizarre, given that the people attending the schools are of very, very different traditions now, and some of them. So it's something very strange, but we cannot underestimate the importance of a faith-based education, and it should be available for those parents who wish to have it. It's a universal human right. It's something that parents as taxpayers are entitled to ask for. And I think that we should not be afraid to say, listen, we believe this is important, because the difficulty is that it feeds into this particular narrative that there's something wrong with having a faith-based educational system, when no other country in the world seems to have any big issues about it. I mean, in the free world, if you want to use that term. So basically, I think that we should deal with this court judgment. We have to, it's the law. But at the same time, not be afraid to say, well, we want a faith-based education for our children. If you do, and if you don't, there ought to be a choice there. And I think that's what these parents, this man and his daughter's case was trying to say, is that if we want an education system where there will not be what they would term indoctrination, we need to be free to have it, and that is true. All parents are entitled to have access to education that they wish for their beliefs of their family and their children.
Archbishop McDowell?
Well, no, I mean, broadly agree. To be honest with you, and I don't know, this maybe it's not the right thing to say, but I would sort of take my hat off to the wee girl who went home and said the prayer in the home, because she obviously enjoyed it. She enjoyed the experience of it in school, so she did it at home. And, it's a rather disproportionate response then to have a Supreme Court judgment that says the wee girl can't say her prayers at home. No, I mean, I think that, as Archbishop Eamon says, it's probably slightly more clear cut for Catholic schools, because it says on the board Catholic school, so you know what it is. You know what it is you're signing up for, as it were. Whereas controlled schools are slightly more, the relationship's slightly more complex in a sense. But the people who I thought about when I read the judgment to begin, or heard about the judgment to begin with, were particularly primary school teachers in controlled schools, many of whom, 80% of whom, are people with a deep Christian faith. And all they had been doing was, and they weren't indoctrinating in the sense of holding somebody down and waterboarding them, into Christian faith. They were in there. Probably the throwaway lines, they said, as much as anything else, and just by their personalities and by their witness were doing something. And I think they're people who will feel a bit demoralised at the moment, and I think we'll need to say to them, look, the work that you do, and the work of, and they would see it as a work of evangelisation, is important work. It can't be heavy-handed, and it can't appear in any sense to compel someone, but it needs to be attractive and to allure people. But no, I mean, I'm perfectly happy that we can work within whatever the guidelines are that come out from the Department of Education.
Two very good answers. I'd like to now open up to the audience. I think there is a floating mic at the back that may be able to be passed around. Baker, our secretary, might be able to do that. Or if people can shout out, I assume my hearing's good enough to hear you. I'm going to assume we can all hear questions from the
so
audience.
much, Archbishop John. He might need
2:45.
Yes, so I think, Baker, if you want to test the mic, give it a wee tap. Matthew, we'll go with Matthew Spratt first.
I don't think I need a mic, but we'll work with that, no problem. I've been very encouraged by tonight's dialogue, especially at how frequently the word evangelical has been coming up. Has been very encouraging. I have a question. The first part potentially more for yourself, Archbishop John, and the latter part for yourself, Archbishop Eamon. Archbishop John, in your remarks regarding Archbishop Sarah Mullally, you said you think she will focus mostly on the Church of England. My question is more centred to this island of Ireland. You said regarding her appointment, don't worry about the repercussions of her appointment, that will work itself out. How do you personally see that working itself out? As this is an incredibly divisive issue, considering over half of the global Anglicans don't recognise the validity of female episcopacy. And Archbishop Eamon Martin, if the Roman Catholic Church did somehow move past the female ordination matter, do you believe that Archbishop Mullally's views on same-sex relationships and abortion impact on ecumenical relations? Thank you very much.
You can always trust Matthew with a hard question.
And James nicked 3 of my questions, so I've had to rework it.
This business about dividing the Anglican communion, there are a small number of provinces, and a province is essentially a national church. So there are a small number of provinces who happen to have a large number of individuals there. I know very little about how I've been in those countries, but I know relatively little. But there's a primates WhatsApp group in the Anglican Communion, and when and there are 42 provinces of the Anglican Communion, and after Sarah Mullally was elected, I counted 38 congratulations on my primates WhatsApp group. So the majority of the primates, from some very small communions like in Brazil, to some very large ones like Kenya still. So I think it's not as divisive as is being portrayed. There are a number of provinces who have simply said that they can't live with female episcopacy or probably female presbyterate either. and that they now are the Anglican Communion. And the historic Anglican Communion is no longer the Anglican Communion. And to be honest, and I'll say this at the next primates meeting, my honest opinion is that those about 6 provinces who said that they now are the Anglican Communion, don't belong to the historic one, is that it would be a courtesy enough from our point of view to say, thank you for making that clear, and it's much better if you go your own way. Otherwise, you're going to involve the rest of us in endless discussions which aren't really going anywhere. So I'm not in the least concerned in that sense, or not as concerned as some people are.
Thank you very much.
Can you remind me of the issues again you mentioned?
Yes.
For same-sex marriage, what was the other one?
Same-sex marriage and abortion.
An abortion, yeah. Well, whatever about any individual church leaders' views on things, I think the key question here would be about what the church's position is on these issues. So, as you know, even within the Catholic Church, there are people with differing views on some of these issues, although the church will be very, very clear that marriage is between a man and a woman, that human life begins at conception, and therefore we must do everything we can to create a culture of life in a world which is invested, let's say, by a culture of death at the moment. And we can only see and listen into some of the debate on the assisted dying bill that's going through Westminster. So I think that, look, the Catholic Church will continue to give its magisterial views on issues to do with marriage, issues to do with life. And they, no doubt, will form part of discussions at ecumenical dialogues and things like that. Although at the moment, I think the real ecumenical dialogues are in deeper theological issues. There seems to be quite a unanimous acceptance of positions on life. Marriage and the family is much more difficult because of the very disparate nature of family and whether or not how that fits into the doctrine of the church, and how that has developed down through the centuries in the understanding of marriage. But I think that really whatever about an individual church leader's position, I'm not sure what position the new Archbishop will take on those issues publicly, or whether she will work within her church to try to get unanimity or at least consensus on those key issues. But I don't think the Catholic Church is going to see it as an obstacle, but it will probably in many ways encourage the Catholic Church to be more clear in stating, because we feel the world needs to hear these messages about the centrality, the fundamental importance for society of marriage and the family, and also of protecting human life, particularly at its most vulnerable and innocent stages.
I'm just conscious of time tonight. If you do have a question, could you put up your hand?
There was somebody down here in the blue top who was up for like a shot at the beginning.
Okay, we'll go to.
So I hope it's an easy question, though.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, do you think that religion can be a counterculture against secularism? And do you see that as being something that the younger generation might participate in?
I have a funny feeling that some of the success of Christianity in France has to do with that countercultural aspect, because as you know, France has for many, many years practiced an extraordinarily sort of harsh form of secularism, laicite, where there's no room in certainly the public dialogue for religion. And I think that young people see the church as countercultural in that sense. And I say this is maybe a slightly... in John's Gospel, when Jesus is with his followers, he speaks about two things. He speaks about deep meaning and about deep love. It's a very compounded. When he has been tried at the end of his life and he's talking to people in authority, he speaks about truth. He doesn't speak about love. He speaks about truth. And I think that young people particularly can see the church in that countercultural way, that it's a guardian of certain truths, that if you allowed, as it were, purely secular society of free reign, would have gone long ago. And I think they do see the importance of the church as being the guardian of those truths and reminding those in power about those truths, which in a sense is what Archbishop Eamon was talking about a little while ago.
Yeah, I'm happy to agree with that if you want to go for another question.
I'm just conscious of time. I know people have to get home and such.
There's Martin wants to ask a question.
Of course.
Just riding on the previous question, it had been mentioned there previously about the quiet revival amongst Gen Z, and that tends to express itself in both Roman Catholic and Protestant traditions as a move towards a more traditional, conservative, you might say, form of those traditions. And with the issues we are experiencing in the present day with secularism and the outworkings of that with abortion, same-sex marriage, what are some ways young people in our communities who, if that growth continues to happen, what are some ways we can come together as Christians of different traditions to see transformation in our society? Thank you.
Well, you're doing it here tonight. I mean, it's things like this. I think it's wonderful to see that some of the chaplaincies are here tonight. I think you can do work together. Peer-to-peer witness is what's needed. You can reach your fellow young adults in a way that we cannot. We had a major synod in Rome in 2015 that I was at, and there were a lot of young people present, and it was all about youth vocation and discernment in the church. And I was a little bit down after one of the sessions, and some of the young American students were there. And I says, look, I'm a relatively young bishop, but I just simply do not know how to reach young people. And they said, well, don't worry about that, Archbishop. They said, that's our job. We will reach young people. You just enable us to do so. Give us formation. Give us the opportunity to learn more about our faith, and we will do that for you. So I think you are the people who are the witnesses here. You've got some sense of faith, belonging. Just one thing we need to be careful about is that some of that trend that you're describing doesn't move into a territory where they begin to distort the Christian faith for political motivations that it's difficult to stand over and be a Christian. In terms of charity, in terms of hope in society. So that's where you need to be careful. We see it on social media. We see it in some of the so-called influencers who are moving to a fairly extreme and using Christianity to justify stuff that we simply cannot stand over. So if you're conscious of that and careful about that, then get out there and go to the digital continent and evangelize or bring the gospel in whatever way you feel is right.
The only I would say is that and it's an echo of what Archbishop Eamon has just said. There was a very influential Reformed theologian called Francis Schaeffer, who was an American, but he set up a community in, I think it was Switzerland, and he invented the idea of co-belligerence. And that was where people, particularly from conservative traditions within Catholicism or within the Reformed, got together to defeat politically certain trends. But it was a deeply unattractive thing in many ways. The very fact it was called belligerence. And what is going to win people for Christ, what's going to win, is this encounter with Jesus. There is the attractiveness of the character of Jesus is, in a way, irresistible if people can be exposed to it both in the lives of believers and in how it's unfolded in the scriptures and in the traditions of the church. And that, I think, is, and you will know how to do that much better than someone of our age will know how to do that with people of your own age.
I think we'll take one very brief question, if someone, hands up high. I see one there at the back, if that's...
So my question is not about the problems of today, but the problems of tomorrow that a lot of us young people are looking at is declining birth rates. There's simply not enough families producing enough children to sustain the population. I just wonder in what ways is the church is looking at this, and what are they doing to address it?
I think it's a really good observation. It's also a fruit of an individualist tendency in society. It's the fruit of I don't want to be too negative, but a kind of a selfishness which is innate in human beings. We are by nature tending towards a selfish nature and way of living. I think that it is destroying the church, and it is destroying society. It is destroying love and relationship and commitment. I believe that a lot of young people are forced by the trends of society at the moment to go through their 20s into their 30s before finding a partner to settle with and to build a family with. And we're only now beginning to realize how difficult that is then for them. So I think the church should be celebrating family. And I'm very conscious that there's no perfect family dropping down from heaven, that everybody can aspire to. I just think that we do need to encourage young families, have room for children, have room for young couples. The people. Whenever I was at growing up, when there were children crying in the church, the priest would sometimes, say, take that child outside. Now I love to hear a child crying inside the church. I mean, it shows that there's youth, that there's a new blood. So I totally agree with you. The whole AI question is presenting big issues for us. Manipulation of the human genome, all sorts of things that are happening, which, we just need. And therefore, what happens is that some young couples then, they go for surrogacy, they go for IVF, all sorts of issues that have ethical complications, but they're not even aware. So I just feel that whatever we can do to promote the family and love and relationship and commitment and fidelity, these are big concepts which people might consider old-fashioned, but they are the hope for the future again.
Well, funny enough, I think by and large, for instance, IVF and surrogacy, I think people are very aware of the moral and the ethical implications of those and do think them through. And I think that, that's a good thing. In not so much in the 60s, but in the late 70s and 80s, certain economic and cultural forces were let loose, which have never really been put back into the box. So the hidden hand of the market now dictates that for two people who are married to be able to afford a half-decent lifestyle, they can only have 2 kids or whatever. And that's the economic orthodoxy of the time. It's a kind of a natural consequence of financial capitalism. How that has worked out, particularly in the Western world. One of the ways, as you know, which we have compensated for it is through migration. In migration, where people coming from Africa particularly, but also from other European countries, have a much higher birth rate. But we have begun to turn our back on that for a whole host of other reasons, which are not good reasons. And from my point of view, although it's a slightly tangential way of answering your question, the big ethical issue globally is to do with migration, and the big ethical issue in Ireland is to do with how we in the churches treat those people who are here, who weren't born here. And we haven't been anything like strong enough, I think, in our advocacy of how those people become integrated into this society. So it's a kind of defining issue, I think, for the churches and Christianity at this time?
I think we could all sit here for many more hours, perhaps, but people have to sleep, people have to go home.
You got study here? Do you have to study?
Sometimes. I think really has been an insightful night. We've heard a lot, and certainly I think there's a lot that we can ponder on and think about. I'd like to thank both men for their presence here tonight and for their wisdom, and I'd like to give a big round of applause and appreciation.
Thank you, James.
I'd just like to invite our President, Daniel Devaney, for some closing remarks. Thank you, Daniel.
Yes, thank you, James. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge what a privilege it is for us all to meet here tonight at the Union Theological College and listen to such insightful ecumenical dialogue between the primates of all Ireland for the churches of the Catholic Church and the Church of Ireland, respectively. It's a great privilege, and I thank you once again for your insight that you've provided us tonight. Tonight's reminding me of a verse from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 21, and it tells us to test everything and hold on to what is good. And that is definitely something that we're all about at the Literary and Scientific Society. And it reminds me of 3 pillars of our society. Using a rule of 3, you can probably tell what denomination I am myself. But it tells us 3 pillars of our society, a 3D vision, if you will: dialogue, discourse, and discussion. And of course, debate as well. But firstly, I want to think about someone who's embodied all 3 of these pillars, the pillars of discourse, of debate, and of discussion. And we can look no further than Jesus Christ in the Bible for that. At the age of 12, Jesus was at the temple engaging in discourse with religious leaders of the time on religious practice and faith. He then went on to engage in various debates, being able to come forward with his beliefs and with his views and speak with authority when it came to him being tested by the Pharisees, and when it came to him in the desert being tested by Satan. And also for discussion, regardless of whatever background they came from, of who they were, Jesus was happy to sit down at the table and have a talk with a person regardless of who they were, leper or prostitute, Pharisee or tax collector. He did not discriminate in that way. And it's that neighbourly love that we touched on earlier tonight. And in fact, we had a debate on This House Would Love Thy Neighbour, which was won quite convincingly by the proposition. But that's essentially what debate is all about. And harking back to that first verse, it's being able to come to the table, to come to the podium, to come to the kitchen table, or to sit in front of an audience, as we have achieved tonight, to come with your beliefs, but not just to come with your beliefs, but to be able to defend your beliefs, to be able to understand where other people's beliefs are coming from, and to be able to say, this is what I believe, and this is why I believe it. And that's why it's so important tonight that both James, in his questions, and they've been very tricky questions, and I thank both of our archbishops for answering them in full detail rather than saying, well, of course, that's a ecumenical matter. But yes, that's something that James has done, and that's something that you have done. So I want you to leave tonight discussing the ideas that we have touched upon on this stage with other people, as I said, whether that's at the podium at one of our debates, whether it's sitting in front of an audience for one of our lit talks, or whether it's at the kitchen table, to be able to discuss the things that we've talked about tonight and to ultimately find that good. So, as a token of appreciation, I would like to invite both Archbishop Martin and Archbishop McDowell to have a Literific pin badge on behalf of our society. And I'd like to thank them once again, and thank you to everyone who's involved in this fantastic event tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I'd like to call this session adjourned. Thank you.